What's the most memorable thing that ever happened to you on the last day of school? For most of us, it's a day filled with pure, unfiltered joy. The final bell rings, and it's like a starting gun for 3 months of freedom. Yearbooks get signed, goodbyes are said, and the hallways that were once a prison become a launch pad into summer vacation. You can almost taste the sunshine and chlorine, the late nights and lazy mornings. It's a universal feeling, that explosion of relief and excitement that marks the end of another academic year. But what happens when that final bell isn't a signal for freedom, but for something else entirely? For some, the last day of school isn't about happy memories or heartfelt goodbyes. It's the day their world turned upside down, the day the familiar, comforting halls of their school transformed into the setting of a nightmare they would never escape. The excitement and celebration can sometimes mask a lurking darkness, a danger that waits for the perfect moment to strike, when everyone's guard is down and their minds are already on summer break. Today, we're going to explore 3 stories where the last day of school became the first day of a living horror. These are tales of celebration turned to terror, of freedom turning into a permanent trap. These stories will make you rethink that feeling of relief when the final bell rings. So, get comfortable and prepare to hear about the dark and twisted side of what should be the happiest day of the school year. Our first story takes us to the small, tight-knit community of Crestwood, Ohio, in the spring of 1998. The last day of school at Crestwood High was an event the whole town looked forward to. It was a tradition. Parents would line the streets to watch the seniors drive off campus for the last time, honking their horns and cheering. 17-year-old Liam Carter was one of those seniors. He was a popular kid, the kind everyone knew and liked. He was the captain of the basketball team, an honor roll student, and had a full-ride scholarship to Ohio State waiting for him. His future was as bright as the May sun shining down that day. Liam spent his final day like any other senior. He went around with his best friends, Mark and Sarah, getting his yearbook signed by underclassmen and teachers. He was in high spirits, laughing and joking, talking non-stop about the big summer road trip the 3 of them had planned before heading off to college. Mrs. Davison, his English teacher, later recalled him stopping by her classroom just before the final bell. He thanked her for everything, gave her a hug, and promised to send a postcard from the Grand Canyon. She said he seemed completely normal, just a happy kid excited for the future. The final bell rang at 2:45 p.m., and a wave of euphoria washed over the school. Liam was seen walking out with Mark and Sarah, heading towards the senior parking lot. They were laughing about something, their arms full of yearbooks and old textbooks they were about to gleefully toss into the trunk of Liam's beat-up Ford Bronco. Mark remembered Liam saying he just needed to run back inside for a second because he forgot his lucky basketball jersey in his locker, the one he wore for every big game. It was a silly, sentimental thing, but it meant a lot to him. He told Mark and Sarah to wait by the car, that he'd be right back. They didn't think anything of it. They leaned against the Bronco, chatting about their plans for that night, a huge bonfire party at Miller's Pond, the unofficial send-off for the graduating class. A few minutes passed, then 5, then 10. The senior parking lot, once a chaotic symphony of car horns and shouting, was starting to empty out. The initial excitement began to curdle into a small, nagging sense of concern. Sarah decided to go look for him. She walked back into the now eerily quiet school. The janitor was already starting his rounds, the squeak of his cart echoing down the long, empty hallways. She checked the locker bay, but Liam wasn't there. His locker, number 347, was shut and locked. She called out his name, but the only reply was the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. A knot of dread began to tighten in her stomach. This wasn't like Liam. He wasn't a prankster. If he said he'd be right back, he meant it. She returned to the parking lot, where Mark was now pacing, anxiously. The lot was almost deserted. Liam's Bronco stood alone under the afternoon sun. They called his name again, their voices sounding small and lost in the vast, empty space. They tried his pager, a relic even then, but got no response. They checked the gym, the library, even the bathrooms. The school was a ghost town. It was as if Liam Carter had walked back through those doors and simply ceased to exist. Panic truly set in when they called his parents. They hadn't seen him. They thought he was with his friends. The police were called and a search of the school was conducted that evening. Every classroom, every closet, every crawl space was checked. They found nothing. His basketball jersey was still in his locker, exactly where he said it would be. He had never even made it there. The last day of school for Liam Carter became his last day on Earth. He was never seen or heard from again, vanishing without a trace from the one place he should have been safest. For our second story, we head to a sprawling old high school in suburban Pennsylvania in 2012. It was the last Friday before summer break, and a group of 4 friends, Maya, Chloe, Ben and Noah, were finishing up a project in the art room. Their teacher, Mr. Harrison, was a bit eccentric and had given them an extension. They were the only students left in the wing, the sounds of celebration from outside fading as the afternoon wore on. They were so focused on finishing their clay sculptures that they didn't notice the time slipping away. It was Ben who first looked up at the clock. It was nearly 5 p.m. The school was dead silent. "Guys, we should probably pack it in," he said, a hint of unease in his voice. They quickly started cleaning up, rinsing brushes and putting away supplies. When Maya went to open the door, it wouldn't budge. She rattled the handle, then pushed with her shoulder. Nothing. It was locked from the outside. "Very funny, Noah," she said, assuming it was a prank. But Noah was on the other side of the room, looking just as confused as she was. A quick check of their phones revealed the true extent of their problem: 0 bars. The art room was in the oldest part of the building, a notorious dead zone for cell service. A wave of real panic began to set in. They banged on the door and yelled for help, their voices swallowed by the thick, soundproofed walls of the classroom. The windows were barred, a relic from a bygone era of school security. They were trapped. As dusk began to settle outside, casting long, creepy shadows across the room, the atmosphere shifted from annoyance to genuine fear. That's when they heard it. A soft scraping sound from the other side of the door. It sounded like fingernails dragging slowly down the wood. They all froze, staring at the door. Ben called out, "Hello, is anyone there? The door is locked." The scraping stopped. For a moment there was only silence, thick and heavy. Then a single deliberate knock echoed through the room. Not a friendly, "let me help you" knock, but a slow, methodical one. Knock, knock, knock. Relief washed over them, quickly replaced by confusion. "Who is it?" Chloe whispered. The only response was the sound of what seemed like soft, wet breathing, right on the other side of the door. The 4 friends huddled together in the center of the room, as far from the door as possible. The sun had now completely set, plunging the classroom into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the emergency exit sign above the door. The strange noises continued intermittently, a whisper that was too faint to understand, the sound of something heavy being dragged down the hallway. At one point, the handle on the door began to jiggle violently, as if someone was trying to force their way in. The terror in the room was palpable. Hours crawled by. They had resigned themselves to spending the night, huddled under a dusty tarp, when they heard the distinct sound of a janitor's keyring jingling down the hall. Hope surged through them. They started screaming and banging on the door again, desperate to get his attention. The jingling stopped right outside their classroom. They heard a key slide into the lock. The door clicked open, and the night janitor, a kind old man named Stanley, stood there with a bewildered look on his face. "What are you kids doing in here? The whole school's been empty for hours." As they stumbled out into the hallway, relieved and exhausted, Maya turned to thank Stanley. "We're so glad you heard us. There was someone out here messing with the door, trying to scare us." Stanley's friendly expression faded, replaced by one of pure confusion. "That's impossible, miss," he said, his voice low. "I've been on the other side of the campus for the past 3 hours. You kids are the first sign of life I've seen in this wing all night. And besides," he added, his eyes drifting down the empty, silent hallway, "these doors lock automatically. You can't lock them from the outside." This final story happened in a rural Texas high school back in 2005. Senior pranks were, kind of a sacred tradition, with each class always trying to outdo the last. The class of '05 had a particularly ambitious plan. Led by a charismatic but honestly pretty reckless student named Kyle, their idea was to stage a haunting on the last day of school. They decided to use the school's old, abandoned third-floor wing, which already had a reputation, thanks to local ghost stories about a student who had tragically fallen from a window decades ago. So the plan was, well, pretty elaborate. A few of them, including Kyle, would hide on the 3rd floor the night before. On the last day, during the final assembly in the auditorium, another group of friends would trigger a series of supernatural events. They had set up fishing lines to make objects move, hidden speakers to play spooky sounds, and even had a friend in the AV club who would flicker the lights at just the right moment. The goal was just to cause a bit of harmless chaos and give the school a send-off nobody would ever forget. At first, the prank started off perfectly. As the principal was giving his farewell speech, the auditorium lights flickered. A low moan echoed from the speakers. A few books flew off a shelf on the stage, pulled by the hidden fishing line. The student body erupted in a mix of laughter and screams. It was exactly what they had hoped for. The teachers were annoyed, but the students were loving it. The pranksters, communicating via walkie-talkies, were congratulating themselves on their success. But then, things started to happen that weren't part of the plan. A cold draft swept through the auditorium, even though, weirdly, all the doors were closed. The pre-recorded moaning from the speakers stopped, but a new sound began, a girl's faint, sorrowful weeping, and it seemed to be coming from the vents above. The students in the AV booth frantically checked their equipment. They weren't playing that sound. Panic began to replace the amusement in the crowd. The teachers tried to restore order, but the atmosphere had grown genuinely chilling. Up on the third floor, Kyle and his friends heard the weeping too. On their walkie-talkie, they asked their friends in the auditorium to cut it out, that it was getting way too creepy. The frantic reply came back, "It's not us, we swear it's not us!" It was then that Kyle noticed one of the windows at the far end of the hallway was wide open. The same window from the old ghost story. A silhouette of a young woman was standing there, her back to them, looking out into the afternoon sky. Thinking it was one of the other pranksters taking things too far, Kyle shouted at her, "All right, Jessica, very funny, prank's over!" The figure didn't move. As he and his friends started walking towards her, a wave of unnatural cold washed over them. The air grew heavy and thick. The figure slowly turned her head, and they saw that her face was pale and indistinct, her eyes like dark, empty voids. It was not Jessica, it wasn't anyone they knew. A collective scream tore from their throats as the figure took a step back and simply fell out of the open window. Kyle and his friends rushed to the window, their hearts pounding in their chests, expecting to see a body on the ground 3 stories below. But there was nothing there. The lawn was empty. The weeping had stopped. The entire school was in chaos below, but up on the 3rd floor there was only a terrifying, profound silence. The prank was over, but the haunting they had staged had become terrifyingly real, leaving them with a memory that would torment them far longer than any summer vacation. The last day of school is supposed to be a beginning, the start of a new, carefree chapter. But for some, it marks an end they never saw coming. A final bell that doesn't signal freedom, but a permanent detention in a nightmare. From a student who walks back into school and vanishes into thin air, to a group of friends who discover they're locked in with something inhuman, to a prank that summons a real ghost, these stories serve as a chilling reminder that even in our happiest moments, darkness can be lurking just around the corner waiting for the bell to ring. These places of learning filled with so much life and energy can also hold echoes of the past and secrets we can't begin to understand. They remind us that some hallways should remain empty, some doors should remain locked, and some stories are more than just legends. So the next time you think back on your last day of school, maybe take a moment to be grateful for the simple, happy memories. Because as we've heard tonight, it could have been so much worse. With that said, thanks for watching. I hope these stories didn't ruin your summer plans too much. If you enjoyed these strange and terrifying tales and want to hear more, please make sure you hit that like button and comment below with your own last day of school story, creepy or otherwise. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next dive into the dark.